Listen, in this video, I am not telling you what to believe or drawing any conclusions about what happened on September 11th, 2001. So TikTok and YouTube, you can't take me down for spreading misinformation. Everything I'm about to say is strictly factual. Here we go. So everybody knows that on September 11th, 2001, the World Trade Center buildings 1 and 2 were hit by commercial airlines that had been hijacked and eventually collapsed. However, it's less well known that World Trade Center Building 7, which was not hit by a plane, also collapsed later that day.
That's good shit. Then we went back there.
A report on what happened was carried out by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST. Their conclusion was that falling debris from Tower 1 had started office fires on the first few floors of Tower 7. And they say that these fires got so hot that they caused thermal expansion in some of the structural beams. This in turn caused the entire building to have what they call a progressive collapse. And if that's correct, this would be the first progressive collapse primarily caused by fire ever in human history. Also, the investigation was made more difficult because immediately after the collapse, government contracted companies began hauling off all the rubble. This was actually illegal because they were tampering with a crime scene before an investigation could be carried out, but that's what happened. Now, many keen observers in the engineering community weren't satisfied with the NIST reports. Some were saying that the studies weren't very rigorous and that NIST had jumped to conclusions. There were some private engineering firms who confirmed the NIST reports, but skeptics said that these companies were contracted by the government and therefore couldn't be fully trusted. Enter Leroy Hulsey, a professor of structural engineering at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who was contracted to conduct his own study of what happened at Tower 7. Hulsey's study, which you can now find online, took his team over 4 years to complete and cost them over $300,000. Essentially what they did was reconstruct Tower 7 in 2 different kinds of modeling software and then simulate the different events that could have led to a collapse. And here's what they found. The principal conclusion of our study is that fire did not cause the collapse of World Trade Center Tower 7 on 9/11, contrary to the conclusions of NIST and private engineering firms that studied the collapse. The second conclusion of our study is that the collapse of Tower 7 was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. So that was their conclusion, that the only way for the tower to collapse the way it did in the video would be for all of the interior and exterior beams to be taken out almost simultaneously. The simulation showed that a progressive collapse due to fire would not have caused the building to collapse in on itself, but would have tipped it over like this. So they believe that the NIST report and the simulations that they carried out were in fact incorrect. Hulsey's study also took into account evidence that was largely ignored by the NIST report, such as a piece of steel preserved by engineers from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute, which was some of the only rubble and material that was saved from that day which could be used as evidence. The engineers from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute said they were shocked that the piece of metal resembled Swiss cheese. It's too bad they hauled off all that evidence, or we could probably understand things with a lot more certainty. Because there's not a lot of certainty around this issue right now. It's impossible to know exactly what happened. And again, I'm not drawing any conclusions or telling you what to believe. The only thing I'm telling you is that you might want to read Dr. Leroy Hulsey's structural revaluation of the collapse of World Trade Center Tower 7. Because if this report is correct, there's a lot of implications you can draw from that. Let's not forget that 9/11 provided the pretext and justification for the invasion of 2 countries, Afghanistan and Iraq, where the US would destabilize and topple Saddam Hussein's government despite him having nothing to do with the hijackings. Much to be considered.